Hello and welcome. Has the Russian winter offensive begun? More and more signs are pointing towards this, but there are big questions open that we will have to discuss in this situation report. Before we start with the situation report, I want to recommend you this article by Oliver Alexander. I'm going to put it in the comment section. He addresses Seymour Hersh's article about the Nord Stream pipeline attack with open source intelligence, and we have to say there's not much left of Seymour Hersh's article after Oliver Alexander is finished. When we start with the general situation in the Ukraine-Russia war, there was a big attack on Ukraine with cruise missiles and missiles again on the 10th of February. Over 100 missiles were actually used by Russia. They were S-300 air defense missiles, SAMs, KH-101, KH-55 and Kaliber. In addition, 7 Shahid drones were used. Ukrainians said they were able to shot down 61 of the missiles, but 2 of those were actually, according to Ukrainian claims, crossing through Romania and Moldova into Ukraine. So probably somewhere in this direction here, they were actually crossing NATO territory and were not shot down. Along the Eastern Front, we have reports about heavy fighting along the whole front line. Over the last few days, there have not been any serious successes along the front line by the Russians, but they keep attacking. They keep attacking continuously. The Russians are also shown to send additional reinforcements to the front line. We have a video here, which is from Sasha Kotz in general, and we see him filming out of the area. It's supposedly showing troops being sent towards Kremina as reinforcements. And we see, let's switch forward here a little, we see that I think was a BMP on the back of a truck. That should be a BMP-2 trucks with likely reinforcements, soldiers, or at least supplies. We see, yeah, that should be a BMP-2, I think. And interesting here, we see the first battle tanks also being moving. That should have been actually one towing another one, if I saw it correctly. So those might be going into a different direction. A BMP-2 coming here. Another BMP-2. Some wrecks which is interesting because they are behind the front line. So the Ukrainians have somehow been able, BMP-3 here, by the way, the Ukrainians have somehow been able to take out this tank behind the front lines. Here we see a towing vehicle. So this is an armored recovery vehicle, which is pulling this BMP, this T-70 here. And we see another one here that should have been T-72 B3M. So one of the basically the most modern version. A lot of reinforcements supposedly going into the area of Kremina. Heavy attacks by the Russians, but as of now, we still do not have a confirmation that those attacks were actually successful. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we have news from the front as well. Riba, the pro-Russian propaganda channel, is showing its map here, and according to them, Bilohorivka, the northern one, not this one here, the northern one at the Siversky Donetsk is halfway captured now by the Russians, but we don't have any confirmation of this, and Riba is pro-Russian, so it might very well not be true. Krasna Hora supposedly is taken by the Russians. This is here. No confirmation yet. The Russians do achieve some successes inside of Bakhmut. They advance slowly over the last few days. Other than that, there's fighting around Avdiivka. There's fighting at Marinka. There's fighting at Vuhledar. And there have been attacks in the direction of Prechystivka, close to Vuhledar. All of those attacks, I cannot confirm any successes. So the Russians attack on basically most of Luhansk and Donetsk without achieving anything that can be shown outside of Bakhmut city itself. On the southern front, there's reports of a Russian attack at Novodarivka, so along the Luhansk, along the Donetsk Oblast border. Other than that, smaller combat engagements, smaller engagements are happening in the Dnipro Delta. Both sides continue to do commando raids into the other areas. Both sides probably to create a appearance of imminent threat and to fix troops in place, which is obviously in the interest of both sides to fix the troops of the other side in place where they are more or less useless, as no side can be expected to do a serious operation over the Dnipro, including building a bridgehead and then advancing anytime soon. We have a video here from Telegram which shows us the usage of incendiary ammunition along the Dnipro. Supposedly, that was also used against Kherson city itself. You see here, by the way, in case you haven't seen it yet, how those shells actually work. When we come to the overall situation here, we have to say as of now, it increasingly seems that the higher intensity of Russian attacks that have been reported in the past situation reports, that the higher intensity of attacks might be an indication that the Russians have actually started their winter offensive. This would be highly interesting, as they would slowly start to roll out an offensive. We were expecting a classic Russian strategy, or the classic Russian tactics of fixing the Ukrainians along the whole front line, basically attacking along the whole front line, shelling the area, and then creating Schwerpunkte, so points of concentration where they attack, trying to break through, trying to advance. But it doesn't seem anything like this is going to happen. Instead, they seem to slowly continue feeding more and more troops in, likely more than they currently use. So the pressure keeps building up very slowly while giving up any element of surprise, anything that would expect it to happen with a normal offensive. I have to say, looking back to my to past offensives that I've read about, I can't honestly remember to have heard something like this ever before. So it seems increasingly that this is the Russian winter offensive, but instead of like you would usually start an offensive, you'd shell the front line and then punch through, push the enemy back because you concentrated overwhelming force, and then you try to exploit that situation. It just seems that they keep feeding the front line until and keep attacking. No concentration, no tactical surprise, nothing. It seems like it, which is extremely weird. And I said, I can't remember historical examples. If you know any, write them in the comment section, please. On the Crimea, we have images of the Russians creating adding additional fortifications here. I've forgotten to put that picture here. Let me do that right now. There we have it. So we see this is Perekop. We see the Russians building defensive lines along the whole area here to increase their defensive positions along the Crimea, the Crimean, I think it's called Isthmus. So basically the entrance to Crimea. Now, as said, we've talked about this in the past. There are coastal fortifications along the coastline here too. This doesn't mean they expect the Ukrainians to break through right away, but they expect a long war, and they calculate that there is the real possibility, at least at some point, that the Ukrainians might actually be at the gates of Crimea, which shows us that from the Russian side, they still take the Ukrainians serious. Partisan activity has also been reported. We have this here, a video supposedly showing a raid on Ukrainian partisans in Berdyansk. Supposedly, they were planning to kill the deputy head of occupation of Berdyansk, the commander of the city, and the head of police. We see here the fighting. I mean, there was no combat. We see basically a police raid, where at a later point you see them bringing bags which supposedly have some explosives in it. When it comes to the mobilization, we have some interesting news from Russia itself. That's a Russian news site. A Russian kontraktniki, a soldier that had signed a contract in September 2020 for a 2-year contract, who was refused to be allowed to leave the army, has sued his commanders. He had cancelled his contract in the May of 2022. in accordance to the contract, but he was refused to be allowed to leave the armed forces because of the mobilization. The court says that was okay, and obviously that should mean that kontraktniki, so contract soldiers that are the better trained part of the Russian armed forces, should not really be very motivated right now, as they are as they entered the armed forces for a certain period of time. They agreed to serve for a certain period of time, including potential combat, but they didn't agree to stay in the armed forces until a potential war is won. So while this might not be a complete disaster for the general morale, it should definitely impede the Russian contract soldiers to a certain degree. There's also currently the preparation for a law in the Russian Duma that would punish the discredit volunteers that fight in Ukraine. That's exactly what Prigozhin was looking for. So he seems to be getting what he actually aimed for. And we have interesting news here from independent Russian media. I scroll it down a little so you can pause it and read it yourself if you're interested. They say that in several oblasts, Wagner is working together with the FSB to basically threaten criminals in prisons, that either they volunteer for Wagner or they will just open new prosecutions to basically sentence them for additional prison time, basically trying to blackmail prisoners either by extension under the threat of extension of their prison sentence to volunteer for Wagner, which uses them as cannon fodder. On the 9th of February, though, you see the day afterward, Prigozhin did claim that Wagner has stopped recruiting prisoners, so we can't really see. If we want to believe Prigozhin, then apparently they've stopped, but it might very well be that this is a reaction to media reports like this, him trying to appear that this report must be untrue. On Telegram, Grey Zone is a pro-Wagner Telegram channel, a big one, and they are fuming. I'm not going to read it out loud what he's writing, but feel free to pause the video to read the comments. So basically, the 22-year-old son of the deputy head of the Federal Agency for State Property Management has received a new contract for uniforms for the Russian armed forces. His company of that 22-year-old existed for 3 months prior to the contract, and the uniforms will cost roughly $1,800 to $2,900 per uniform. And according to Telegram, the quality of those uniforms is garbage and they are completely overpriced. So basically, corruption in its full flow. The Grey Zone, this channel, accordingly wrote that Shoigu and all his guys should basically have to be removed from government because of that blatant case of corruption that is going to happen here. We also have reports from Kazakhstan that they are changing their laws when it comes to permanent residency for Russians. This will make it harder for Russians to get a permanent residency, and obviously the speculation is that it is a nod towards the Russians to force some Russians that have fled to Kazakhstan to return to Russia and then be able to be mobilized in the armed forces. Also, it's reported that Russia is starting to use facial recognition at the border points to be able to identify who is a draft dodger, to be able to catch them before they leave the country. In the end, before we finish, we have some interesting news. First that Starlink is getting reduced the abilities of Starlink in Ukraine, because Elon Musk is saying it was never meant to aid the Ukrainians militarily, and the Ukrainians are using it to control drones with it. Obviously, Ukraine is fuming. Ukraine's supporters are angry too. There are some rumors that Elon Musk is doing this as a nod towards the Chinese, because he wants to be able to keep selling Tesla cars on the Chinese market. In the end, he's a businessman, and I guess he has to keep his business running. And all of you out there who have Tesla stocks will probably, at least in this regard, think he's doing his job. In the end, we have to say it's a very weird situation that a private company was able to supply a vital war service. Obviously, Without Starlink, you could argue that Starlink was maybe the most important delivery of systems to the Ukrainian armed forces at the beginning of the war. Nothing might have had an equal impact in the midterm for the Ukrainian ability to defend itself, and for especially for the Ukrainian ability to communicate. But that was a private company, not a state-owned company. And in the end, a private company is responsible towards its shareholders, towards its owners. So, yeah, I leave your comment in the comment section. What do you think about this decision? Can you understand if Elon Musk actually is doing it to be able to sell more of his cars, or do you think he should take the losses, and the stock owners should take the losses because of this, or whether it's justified? Other than that, we have an interesting video here. That's the first proof of a BMPT being destroyed. BMPT are those Terminators. They are the tanks. Let me turn it off, not that there's some music here. BMPTs, the Terminators, are the tanks that are being used, that were designed basically as a close combat support vehicle. They have 2 autocannons, they have anti-tank guided missiles, they have machine guns, they have automatic grenade launchers, all of it on a well-protected tank chassis as a response to the experiences the Russians have made in the war in Chechnya, where their better armored tanks were not able to shoot on higher floors in buildings with insurgents, and the IFVs that were able to shoot to elevate their guns far enough didn't have the protection. It isn't in service in the Russian armed forces in big numbers, but here we now have the first proof of one being destroyed. So in this regard, something special. And finally, we have a video that is supposedly showing the Russian T-14 Armata for the first time in combat in Ukraine. But while I'm playing it, I want you to pay attention if you spot the detail here. So I'm not sure you've seen it, but the elevation of the barrel is fairly high. So this is probably indirect shooting regarding the elevation of high-speed rounds. And that is exactly what I said when the topic was first discussed, that T-14s might end up in Ukraine, that Russia might use them in Ukraine, but they will use them in a way that the likelihood of them being destroyed is close to zero, and the likelihood of them being captured is zero. So what we will, if this tank is actually in Ukraine and if it's actually shooting at something Ukrainian, then we can expect it to be probably several kilometers behind the front line, and the high elevation of the barrel, you can see it in comparison to the horizon. And even though the horizon is already tilted, so this should be a distance of several kilometers that the T-14 is shooting here. The Russians might actually be using it, but they'll use it in a point where it cannot be destroyed, and where especially it cannot be captured, as both would be horrible, both in intelligence wise as well as in regards to potential sales. This is likely just a PR move. I don't think the firepower of the T-14 is really needed. In Ukraine, the tank will not be reliable enough to successfully use it in active combat against Ukrainian forces that fight back. If it breaks down and gets destroyed, it would be a PR disaster. So it just makes sense for the Russian side to use them for some PR events behind the front line, but not directly in the front line, not punching into the Ukrainian lines. That's it from me for now. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much for everyone already supporting the channel. And if you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment if you think what you think about the T-14, about the Russian invasion, about the Russian offensive unfolding right now. Have you heard about historic example of this slowly building up while already attacking? Have you heard that before? And what do you think about the Starlink decision from Elon Musk, or from Elon Musk's company? What do you think about this? All of this obviously helps with the algorithm. And if you liked what I do here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.